All right, let's get right into it. Imagine a war that kicks off with one massive strike, but in just a matter of days, it threatens to bring the entire global economy to its knees. Now, this isn't some movie script. We're going to break down a really detailed, but hypothetical, scenario of a US-Iran war, and you'll see just how fast a regional fight can become everybody's problem.
So just to give you an idea of the sheer scale we're talking about here, look at this. The very first day of this hypothetical war, it involves almost double the number of American bombs and missiles that were dropped on Iraq during the first day of shock and awe. So right from the jump, this wasn't a small skirmish. It was an absolutely overwhelming blitz.
And this timeline, it just shows you how quickly things can go completely off the rails. Within the first 24 hours, the whole thing just explodes. It starts with a decapitation strike on Iran's supreme leader, then it blows up into huge air campaigns, and then, bam, Iran retaliates. But not just against the US or Israel, no. They launch missiles at a dozen of their neighbors. And by the end of that first day, they shut down the Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for global trade. The fuse is officially lit.
So, how did this whole mess get started? Well, Section 1 is all about that initial spark, a truly overwhelming opening attack.
Okay, the numbers here are just wow. In the first week alone, the US hits Iran with over 2,000 airstrikes, taking out most of its navy. Meanwhile, the Israeli Air Force is hitting something like 1,000 targets per day. But look at that third line. This isn't some clean surgical operation. Human rights groups are immediately reporting over 1,000 civilian deaths. The human cost is there from the very beginning, and it's massive.
But why? Why take such a monumental risk? That gets us to the justification for the war, which was really a calculated and, as you'll see, a pretty confusing gamble.
You know, one of the most revealing details in this whole scenario is that nobody in the US administration seems to agree on what the actual goal is. You've got President Trump saying one thing, calling for revolution, but also offering to cut a deal. Then you have his top people, the Secretaries of State and War, and they've got their own shopping lists. Destroy the missile program, sink the Navy, wipe out all nuclear capabilities. It's just a total lack of a clear mission. And that's a really critical piece of this puzzle. So the big question is, why now? Well, the thinking was that Iran was basically a house of cards. Its water was running out, its economy was in an absolute freefall, and the government had just violently crushed a massive popular uprising. The perception was that the regime was weaker than it had been in decades, and maybe, just maybe, one big push would be enough to make the whole thing collapse.
But here's the thing. The regime didn't collapse. Not at all. Instead, it lashed out. And that brings us to Iran's retaliation, which had a very simple strategy: attack literally everyone.
And when Iran hit back, they didn't just target one or two places. I mean, just look at this list. It's not surgical. It's a massive barrage aimed at pretty much every country in the region, from Saudi Arabia to Turkey. The strategy here wasn't about winning a conventional military fight. It was about creating absolute, undeniable chaos.
And that's the crucial point right there. Iran's goal was to hit the global economy where it hurts, and hit it hard. By attacking all of its neighbors, especially the Gulf states that supply so much of the world's energy, the idea was to create so much international panic that the US would be forced to call the whole thing off.
And that pain? Oh, it was felt almost instantly, all over the world. So let's look at the fallout. Immediate global economic shockwaves. 3,000. Just let that number sink in. That's how many merchant vessels, we're talking oil tankers, massive container ships, were stranded the moment Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz. That's about 10% of the entire planet's container fleet, just stuck. Global supply chains basically frozen overnight.
And this is where it starts hitting everybody's wallet hard. With the strait closed, oil prices jump 14%. But look at natural gas in Europe. It spiked by a staggering 70%. A 70% jump. This is no longer some distant regional conflict. It's a full-blown global energy crisis.
And the chaos wasn't just on the water. In that first week, over 18,000 flights got canceled. It's like a giant hole was just ripped in the map of global air travel. This paralyzed not just passenger flights, but also air freight, trapping tens of thousands of people and billions of dollars in goods all around the world. And if you think all of that sounds bad, well, hold on. Because according to this scenario, it could get so much worse. This next part looks at the escalation ladder, how the world could find itself right on the brink of something truly catastrophic. Okay, so let's talk about something that is genuinely terrifying: water. For desert countries like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, these desalination plants aren't just important infrastructure, they supply up to 90% of all their drinking water. They're not just facilities, they are the literal lifeline that makes modern life possible there.
And this isn't just speculation. Check out this chilling quote from an actual US diplomatic cable from 2009. It said, "A successful attack on Saudi Arabia's water supply could force the capital, Riyadh, a city of over 7 million people, to be completely evacuated within a single week." Think about that. That is the nuclear option of conventional warfare in that part of the world.
So this is how everybody else gets dragged into the fight. It's a chain reaction, right? First, Iran hits near British and French bases, so the UK jumps in and gives the US access to its bases for attacks. Then a missile hits Turkey, which is a NATO member, and that's a huge deal because an attack on one is considered an attack on all. And while that's going on, the CIA starts arming different groups inside Iran, risking a descent into a chaotic Yugoslav-style civil war.
Which leaves the US president in an impossible spot. A deep hole he helped dig. What do? If you end the war, you look weak. You've betrayed your allies, and you've left behind an even angrier, more vengeful Iran. But if you keep the war going, you could crater the global economy, and your popularity at home will completely tank. There are literally no good moves left on the board.
And that really brings us to the final, sobering takeaway. As the global order starts to fracture and all these major powers get pulled in, the conflict just transforms. The question stops being, how do we win? And it becomes, how do we survive what comes next? What does the world even look like after a crisis like this? That's a pretty scary thought to leave you with.